When my brother lost his job, my fiancée said, "Tell him to figure it out. It's not my responsibility." I just nodded. Later, when her dad asked me for a loan, I replied the exact same way. She called me heartless and begged for help. There are moments in a relationship that act like tracer rounds in the dark. They illuminate the entire battlefield, showing you exactly where the lines are drawn and where the enemy is hiding. For me, that moment came on a rainy Wednesday night, sitting in the warm, comfortable living room of the house I owned, listening to the woman I was supposed to marry describe my family as a liability. Let's back up. My name is Mark. I'm a partner at a mid-sized investment firm. My world is numbers, risk assessment, and long-term strategy. I'm not an emotional guy, but I am a loyal one. Family, to me, is a non-negotiable bond. My younger brother, David, is my best friend. We grew up with nothing, relying on each other while our parents worked 2 jobs each. That kind of bond doesn't just fade away. My fiancée, Isabella, came from a different world. Her father, Richard, was a self-proclaimed serial entrepreneur who was always one big deal away from changing the world. And her mother, Eleanor, was a woman whose primary occupation was managing the family's social calendar. They lived in a big, mortgage-to-the-hilt house and drove leased luxury cars. They were experts in the art of appearing wealthy. I saw the signs, of course. The casual mentions of temporary cash flow issues, the way Richard would steer conversations toward my portfolio. But I loved Isabella, and I thought her family's financial theater was just a quirk. An old money habit of keeping up appearances. 2 months ago, the bottom fell out for my brother. The tech company he worked for as a senior developer had a massive round of layoffs, and his whole department was eliminated. It was a brutal, no-warning situation. He has a wife, Sarah, and 2 young kids. Their whole life was built around that income. David called me the day it happened, his voice hollow with shock. He wasn't asking for a handout, just for advice. He was terrified. That night, I brought it up with Isabella. We were in the kitchen and I was making dinner. I laid out the situation. David's job loss, his mortgage, the kids. I told her I was thinking of helping them out, maybe covering their mortgage payments for a few months to give them some breathing room while David looked for a new job. I expected empathy, support, a discussion. What I got was a cold, hard wall of indifference. She didn't even look up from her phone, where she was scrolling through pictures of wedding venues. "That sounds stressful for him," she said, her tone flat and dismissive. "It is," I said, pressing the issue. "I think we should help. We can easily afford it." She finally looked at me, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "Mark, why is that our problem? He's a grown man with a family. He needs to stand on his own 2 feet. I was taken aback by the callousness. "He just lost his job, Izzy. He's not asking for a handout. He's in a crisis. This is what family does." "No," she said, her voice sharp and final. "This is what your family does. My family handles their own affairs. We have a wedding to pay for, a honeymoon. We can't be bailing out your brother every time he hits a rough patch. Tell him to figure it out. It's not my responsibility." And there it was, the tracer round. In that one cold sentence, she showed me everything I needed to see. My family was a line item on a budget, a potential drain on the resources she considered hers. Her family, with their endless financial drama, was a noble cause. Mine was a burden. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. A profound and chilling clarity washed over me. The woman I was about to marry had just failed the most important test of her life. The engagement, in my mind, was over. The wedding was a fiction. The only thing left to do was to manage the fallout and make sure she understood, in the clearest possible terms, the true meaning of the words, "not my responsibility." I just nodded. "You're right," I said, my voice calm. "It's not your responsibility." She gave me a satisfied smile and went back to her phone, convinced she had won the argument. She had no idea she had just lost everything. Update 1. The weeks following that conversation were a quiet, methodical preparation for a war Isabella didn't even know was coming. On the surface, I was the perfect fiancé. I feigned agreement with her on everything. I let her believe her cold dismissal of my brother was a settled issue. I listened to her talk about floral arrangements and seating charts, all the while seeing her not as my future wife, but as a hostile variable in a complex equation that I needed to solve. My first move was to help my brother, but I did it in secret. I met David for lunch the day after my talk with Isabella. I wrote him a personal check for 6 months of his mortgage payments and told him it was a gift, not a loan. I also hired a top-tier career coach and resume writer for him, services he never would have been able to afford on his own. I told him to tell no one, especially not Isabella. I framed it as not wanting to cause any drama before the wedding. He was grateful and agreed. My next move was a deep dive into the financial labyrinth of Isabella's family. I was an investment analyst. Digging through financial statements was second nature to me. I started with public records. Richard's history was a graveyard of failed LLCs and small claims court judgments. He had a pattern: start a flashy new venture with investor money, pay himself a huge salary, run the company into the ground, and then declare bankruptcy, leaving his investors with nothing. Then I looked at our own finances. Isabella had a habit of making emergency transfers from our joint savings account to her personal account. They were never large amounts, usually just a few $100s at a time, but they were consistent. When I cross-referenced the dates of these transfers with her phone records, yes, I did a full audit of our shared phone plan, I found they always coincided with frantic calls and texts from her father. She wasn't just apathetic to my family's struggles, she was actively using my money to subsidize her own family's financial irresponsibility. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when I did a credit check. I had a premium credit monitoring service that allowed me to view the activity on accounts where I was the primary holder. Isabella was an authorized user on my main Amex card. I noticed a series of large payments to a single vendor I didn't recognize, a company called Prestige Event Solutions. A little digging revealed it was the parent company of the ultra-exclusive country club where her parents were members. She had been using my credit card to pay her parents' membership dues for the last 6 months, disguising them under a vague corporate name. The deception was breathtaking in its scope. She wasn't just a woman with different values, she was a willing participant in a long-term financial con, with me as the mark. While I was uncovering this, David, with the help of the career coach, was thriving. He landed 3 interviews in 2 weeks. A month after being laid off, he accepted a new position as a director of engineering at a more stable company, with a 20% raise and a signing bonus. When he told me the good news, the relief in his voice was overwhelming. He tried to pay me back the money I had given him, but I refused. I told him to put it towards his kids' college funds. I let Isabella know that David had found a new job. Her reaction was a smug, self-satisfied nod. "See?" she said, as if this proved her point. He figured it out. It's always better to let people handle their own problems. The irony was so thick, I could have cut it with a knife. With the evidence I needed in hand, and my brother safely on his feet, I moved to the final phase of my plan. I knew the ask was coming. Richard's latest venture, some half-baked import-export scheme, was imploding. The panicked calls to Isabella were becoming more frequent. It was only a matter of time before they turned to me. I didn't have to wait long. Isabella came to me one evening, her expression a carefully crafted mask of concern. She told me her father was facing a temporary setback and needed a bridge loan to secure a big contract that would make everything right. She was asking for $50,000. I listened patiently. I asked to see the business plan, the financials, the contract. She produced a glossy, GovMac, professionally printed brochure that was full of buzzwords and projections but contained zero actual substance. It was the kind of proposal you give to a fool. "I'll need to think about this," I said, my voice grave. "This is a significant amount of money. I'd like to meet with your father to discuss it in person. Let's have him and your mother over for dinner on Saturday." She beamed, convinced I was taking the bait. "That's a great idea," she said. "Once he explains it to you, you'll see what a huge opportunity this is." Oh, I knew it was a huge opportunity. An opportunity to finally end this charade in the most spectacular and satisfying way possible. Update 2. The Saturday of the dinner party felt like the culmination of a 2-month-long strategic operation. I spent the day preparing not just a meal, but a courtroom-style presentation. I had every piece of evidence organized in a sleek, leather-bound portfolio. The bank statements showing the secret transfers. The credit card bills with the country club payments highlighted. Public records of Richard's failed businesses. It was all there. A detailed and undeniable account of their long-running deception. Isabella was in high spirits, convinced this was the night they would secure their financial future. She bought a new dress for the occasion and spent hours getting ready. Her parents arrived at 7 o'clock sharp, all smiles and expensive cologne. Richard was carrying a bottle of champagne, a man already celebrating a victory he hadn't yet won. Eleanor was already talking about the new summer collection at her favorite boutique. We made it through the appetizers with forced, polite small talk. Richard dominated the conversation, of course, with vague pronouncements about the global economy and the importance of disruptive innovation. It was a word salad of corporate jargon, designed to sound impressive to people who didn't know any better. Finally, over the main course, he made his move. He launched into his grand pitch, laying out his vision for his failing company. It was a masterclass in delusion, a rambling, incoherent fantasy of international trade and exponential growth. He concluded with a flourish, turning to me with a magnanimous smile. "So, Mark," he said, leaning back in his chair, "as you can see, this isn't just an investment. It's a chance to get in on the ground floor of something truly revolutionary. 50,000 is all we need to unlock the next phase. For family, of course, I'm prepared to offer you a generous 10% stake. 10% of nothing." It was almost insulting in its audacity. Isabella was looking at me, her eyes shining with anticipation. Eleanor was already planning her next shopping spree. I took a slow sip of my wine. I dabbed my mouth with my napkin. Then I looked across the table at Richard. "No," I said. The single word hung in the air, a discordant note in their carefully composed symphony of entitlement. Richard's smile froze. Isabella's jaw dropped. What do you mean, no?" Richard stammered, his composure cracking. I turned my gaze to Isabella. "Tell him to figure it out," I said, my voice calm and even. "It's not my responsibility." I repeated her own words back to her, the same cold, dismissive phrase she had used when my brother, a man facing a genuine crisis, was in need. The color drained from her face as she understood what was happening. "Mark, don't you dare," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Oh, I dare," I said, finally letting the cold anger I had been suppressing for 2 months surface. I opened the portfolio I had placed next to my chair and slid the first document across the table. It was the bank statement, with her secret transfers to her father highlighted in yellow. "You see, Richard," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. "I'm not a bank, and I'm certainly not a fool. For the last year, your daughter has been siphoning money from our joint account to you, a little bit at a time, hoping I wouldn't notice. I did." I slid the next document across. The credit card bill. "And I certainly noticed when my credit card was being used to pay your $5,000 a year country club dues, a club you clearly can't afford on your own." Eleanor let out a small, strangled gasp. Richard was staring at the papers, his face a mask of pale, sweaty shock. "You have a long history of this, don't you, Richard?" I continued, tossing a summary of his business bankruptcies onto the table. "You live a life you can't afford, propped up by loans and investors you never pay back. And you were grooming me to be your next Mark, your golden goose." I stood up from the table. "The $50,000 question isn't whether I'll invest in your failing company. The question is why my fiancée felt it was her responsibility to bail out her family of grifters, but not to show an ounce of compassion for my brother, who was facing a real crisis." Isabella finally found her voice. You helped him?" she stammered, looking betrayed. "Of course I did," I said, "because that's what family does. We support each other. We don't treat each other like liabilities. David is back on his feet now, in a better job than he had before, because he had the support he needed. He figured it out, with my help. Your father, on the other hand, seems to have a problem he can't solve with another handout." I looked at Isabella, the woman I had almost married. There were no tears in her eyes, just a cold, hard fury. The mask had finally slipped. "The engagement is over," I said. "The wedding is canceled. You have 1 week to pack your things and get out of my house. Your responsibility is now your own." Final update. The week that followed was a masterclass in entitlement and delusion. Isabella, apparently believing she had some legal claim to my life, refused to leave. She and her mother alternated between tearful begging and furious threats. I didn't engage. I had my lawyer, Diana, send a formal eviction notice, and I changed the locks. They tried to launch a smear campaign, of course. They told all their friends and family that I was a cruel, vindictive monster who had abandoned Isabella for no reason, right before her wedding, and had cruelly refused to help her ailing father. But their narrative had a fatal flaw. The truth. My brother and his wife Sarah had already told our entire circle of friends about Isabella's cold dismissal of their situation. When the news of our breakup came out, and the reason for it, no one was surprised. The story of her hypocrisy, of her callous disregard for my family, contrasted with her secret financial support of her own, spread like wildfire. The smear campaign didn't just fail, it backfired spectacularly, painting them as exactly what they were: selfish, manipulative, and greedy. The financial collapse of Isabella's family was swift and total. Without the prospect of my money, Richard's latest venture folded in a matter of weeks. The creditors came calling. They had to sell their house, the one they were so proud of, and move into a small, rented townhouse on the other side of the city. The leased luxury cars were repossessed. The country club membership was, of course, canceled. Isabella is now living with them, sharing a bedroom with her mother's collection of unsold multi-level marketing products. She had to get a real job, an entry-level position at an insurance company, and from what I've heard, she hates it. She's had to sell most of her designer clothes and handbags to pay for her own bills. The most satisfying moment came about 6 months after our breakup. I was at a restaurant with my brother and his family, celebrating his promotion. He was thriving. His family was happy and secure. As we were leaving, I saw her. She was on a date with some guy who looked like a carbon copy of her father, all flashy suit and fake confidence. She saw me. She saw me with my happy, successful brother. She saw the life she could have had, the family she had disdained. She looked away, her face a mixture of anger and humiliation. My revenge was quiet. She taught me a valuable lesson that night in the kitchen, the importance of knowing who is and who is not your responsibility. And I simply returned the favor.